This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to Believe in People, a two-time Radio Academy Award nominated and British Podcast Award-winning series about all things addiction, recovery and stigma. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. In this profoundly moving episode of Believe in People, I sit down with Ross, an advocate, facilitator and voice for men navigating grief, mental health and recovery. Ross's story begins with the devastating loss of his father to suicide, an event that fractured his world and set in motion a series of personal battles with addiction, trauma and despair. For years, alcohol and cocaine served as a mask for pain he could not speak aloud, culminating in multiple suicide attempts that brought him to the brink of death and to eventual turning point. It was in a hospital bed with his mother by his side that Ross began to rebuild. Against a backdrop of doubt, stigma and overwhelming loss, he chose sobriety, and later, solidarity. His involvement with AndysManClub became a catalyst for not only his own healing, but for offering that same lifeline to others. Today, Ross helps lead a growing community of men who, like him, have learnt that silence is never strength, and that speaking openly can save lives. I begin by asking Ross about his childhood and what led to early addiction.
Growing up, I was, a typical Jack the lad, went out every weekend, lived for the weekends, played footy with the football lads. But I had a great childhood, fantastic mum and dad. And I only really started taking drugs as a weekend thing when I was about 17, I think. Started off taking ecstasy, speeds, and then cocaine, and then wondered why the fuck I couldn't sleep all night,
Yeah.
I was always just, like I said, live for the weekend with the lads. But the main trigger point was, it's 2014. So my mum decided to leave my dad, they'd been together 28 years. And I still lived with them, and it had a massive impact on me.
How old was you at that time?
I was 26 at the time. And it's all I knew, I went out with my mum and dad, I partied with them, My dad was from an Irish family, so we all loved to drink, and I'd spend like a lot of evenings with them. And they were, like I said, I loved them both to pieces. So this was like a massive shock to me. And I always remember that they didn't see a real impact on it was having on me. And I remember the for sale sign went up on the house, and I'd gone out one Thursday, and I came back and I just burst into tears. So I ripped the for sale sign down, doused it in petrol in the back garden and set it on fire. And it wasn't until that moment that they thought, God, this is having an impact on Rossi.
Because I think the thing is, when parents split up, some people think that's something that really only affects children. But I think in a way, by the time you're, did you say 24 or 26?
I was 26 at the time,
At 26, at that age, you're going to think you're going to be one of the lucky ones where your parents are together forever.
Of course.
Because that's a lifetime, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? For that to happen. So, yeah, I can massively... My parents split up when I was about 14, 15, and then I remember the impacts that had on me.
Yeah.
But I don't think it'd have been any different had I been 14, 15 or 24, 25, 26, whatever.
I think as well with my family, we're all close-knit, and like I said, we're more like friends. They were mum and dads, but we were best friends as well. So it was like kind of a massive effect. And I didn't know like about mental health or anything. And I ain't gonna lie, I used to say to people, God, mental health, depression, it's a chance to get off the day off work or something. And fucking how wrong was I? So when the house sale finally went through, I said to my mum, I'm going to have to go live with Dad because, we're in business together, me and my dad. I said, I'm going to have to go because he might struggle a little bit. I said, don't think, it's hard for me to go with him, but I don't think any less of you. I love you to pieces. And her decision was, 28 years, it's a long time. And she blames herself, obviously, for what did go on. But my dad, he started to hit the drink a bit. He'd go out and he'd make a show of himself sometimes. But he was the life and soul. No one else saw it. But I think my mum's side, because she was in a relationship with him, never married. But I think she was started to get embarrassed by him, and so to leave was a big thing. So anyway, the house sale went through, and I went and moved with my dad's. And it just got, he didn't want to go to work. I was keeping the business running, with painter and decorators. And I was like, oh God, why is he not coming out to work, but he can go out on a night and get pissed? And the main thing was they got a settlement each from the house, which was 51 grand a piece. So my dad was spending it like it was, like Monopoly money, out every night, but didn't come to work during the day. So it was a little bit annoying. And it wasn't until, so the first time I walked back after he'd been on a night out. I'd come back from my girlfriend's at the time, and I walked in, and there was fucking, like, we were really clean, and there was beer cans everywhere. I was like, what the fucking hell's going on here? And I walked to the top, so we lived on like a 3 floor. And I got to like the floor where my bedroom was, and there was his bank cards, and there was a note there, and it basically says, "I'm so sorry, Ross. I love you to bits and all this, but I've took an overdose. I'm upstairs." So as you can imagine, my heart was beating. So I literally ran upstairs, not knowing if he was going to be alive or dead. And my dad, he took he was on tramadol for 20 years because he used to be a professional jockey. My dad, and there's a different story I'll tell you about. But he had a really bad fall, so he was on these tramadols for years. So he'd overdosed on them with drink and everything. So I went up and I shook him, and he just opened his eyes. So I was like,
the right, relief. I imagine that you felt in that moment. Yeah.
Huge relief.
So yeah, he had intended to.
He had intended, definitely a suicide note. Yeah. Jeez, yeah. So I was going to ring the ambulance, and he said, "Please don't. I don't want anyone to know about this." So I sat with him all day, made him drink a shitload of water. I made sure he was sick and stuff. But still, then I was, mental health, I didn't know anything about, and I thought, what's going on with him? I know he's upset about my mum and stuff, but, I still didn't have a massive range of knowledge about it. And I remember being out one night, because I was starting to get a little bit worried, and someone said about ringing the Samaritans. So I remember, ringing them on I think it was a Friday night. I'd had a drink myself, and just explained a few bits, saying, I've found this note, he doesn't want to get up during the day, but on the night time, he's out drinking all the time. So they said refer him to your GP. So I said to Dad, look, please, will you go to the doctors and just try and get some help, whether it's take tablets or whatever it is. So anyway, he said, I'll be all right. And that's what it always was. And then it was 2 weeks later, it was July the 3rd. So on the Friday night, we used to always go for a beer after work. He actually came to work that day. We're in our local pub. And he just didn't see himself. So he had a pint and he drove off home. So I finished mine and went after him. And he was in the kitchen. So I was just having a chat with him. I was like, "You going to be all right?" Yeah, I'll be all right, Ross, don't worry. I said, "Look, everything's fine. I'll keep the business going. I know that you're not in it at the moment." And I thought he went to bed. So the girlfriend I was with at the time, I'd had my tea and stuff, went and sat in the living room. And I came back and the kitchen looked out onto the driveway. We had a garage. And I noticed that the garage door was open and the light was shining through it. And I thought, well, it must just have been left open. So I just washed up, did normally, and I just went and lit a cig and walked up to the garage door to just check what was going on. And yeah, that's when my life shattered in front of me, because I opened up the garage door and my dad had a tow rope around his neck and hung himself from the ceiling, from the beams. So my instant reaction was just to grab him. And I remember grabbing him, and just slumping over my shoulder, and I was looking for something to cut him down with. Not sure if he was alive or dead. And there was some little hedge cutters to the left of me. So as I had him over my shoulder, leant over and I cut him down. And as I went down with him, I knew he was dead. And I just laid his body on the floor. And I was like, it was horrible. So the first thing I did was phone 999, just explain what happened. And the first person who turned up on the scene was a community support officer. And she said, we've had noise complaints. What's going on? So obviously she's only doing her job. And I said, my exact words was, "Fucking noise complaints." I said, "My dad's dead in there. He's just hung himself." It's later on after she felt really bad, She was just turning up for a job, but that was the first person. And then I'll always remember this. A car had pulled up and it was one of my friends in. And he jumped out and he was like, "What's going on?" I told him. And he gave me the biggest hug ever. And since this day, I'll never, ever, ever forget that hug. So yeah, the police turned up, the undertakers and everything came. I had to ring my mum as well and explain what had happened. And my mum quickly drove up because she lived about 2 minutes away. And I said, "Please don't open the garage." And she opened the garage door and seen him. And it just broke her heart. So obviously everything was going on. I was like, what the hell's going on here? He's dead. I've got all this to deal with. And it was it's the hardest thing ever, because he wasn't just my dad. He was my best friend.
You can tell by the way you're talking about your relationship with him that it isn't just Do you know, the fact you got a business together, do you know, it's like your work colleagues as well, do you know what I mean? You spent a lot of time together.
A lot of time. It was, like I said, and it's 10 years in July since he did it, and it's still, talking about it doesn't get any easier.
No, I can see. Do you know, and as you're telling that story, I've got a really good relationship with my dad. I was just trying to imagine that. And just, I could feel myself behind the eyes thinking, fucking hell. Like that would fuck anybody up, wouldn't it?
That was, it was all just, I didn't know what the hell was going on. So when we were sat in the living room with the police officers, they were almost questioning me. Like, look, it looks like suicide, but we're going to have to question you.
Fucking hell.
So I'm sat there thinking, fucking hell, I've just seen my dad, like, he's dead. I've had to cut him down. And now you're questioning whether it is actually suicide. Obviously, they're only doing the job, but I'm like...
but still, yeah, just...
It was tough. And then, oh God, I always remember this as well. So the police officer asked if I was the only child, like Martin's only child. And I was like, yeah, I am. My mum said no. And I looked at my mum, I was like, what? He said, your dad had a son that he paid for up until he was 18, called Daniel, in Doncaster. And I was like, what? So I'm like, I've just found my dad dead. Now I've found out I've got like a fucking half brother. I'm like, how much more can I take in here?
And this is all happening in the same night?
This has all happened in the space of about an hour.
Jesus.
So, obviously, I've never pursued it anymore to find this Daniel or do anything, because how do I come across it? You know, I'm your half brother and your dad's dead, you know, so I've never gone on to find him.
Even not obviously, I know it's not something that would have happened immediately, but within 10 years, you've never done that. Even
within 10 years, no, I've never spoke about it. I know what impact it had on my life. So obviously there were reasons there why they've not been in touch, but I just didn't want to put on to some randomer, you know, this is the story, this is what's happened, just because everything I've gone through since them 10 years, I just don't want to put it on anyone else. Yeah. So that's
and in a stranger as well, you know, like you said, your dad was a friend to you, a real good relationship.
He was my best friend.
If your dad hasn't had a relationship with this Daniel, do you know?
Yeah.
I suppose it's just strange in the sense of like such a close relationship with yourself. Imagine going to this person and explaining, oh, by the way, this had happened. And I think as well, depending on what that reaction would be, for instance, if I don't care. It wasn't in my life. Do you know what I mean? That'd just piss. If I was in that situation, I'd just get pissed off about that.
I think there's a mixture of two things, whether, see, it could, for all I know, we could form like a friendship, or like, you know, and it could, but I'm not prepared to put anyone else's life in that.
Yeah.
And you know, my dad didn't have the greatest upbringing. He didn't, and he always said to me, he said, you know, I was never had the greatest upbringing from his dad. But he said I'd never put that on you. So that's why we had the friendship. He was just, like I said, he was my best friend. He was my partner in crime. You know, he was my business partner.
Yeah. So where did it go then after the police officer had asked? You know, are you the only child?
So my mum was like, no. And then obviously you can imagine my shock. And then she explained that he has got a son in Doncaster called Daniel. And I just left it at that. So obviously the undertaker, it was horrible having to watch him go into that body bag and get zipped away. And I remember I just couldn't sleep for the love of God. And I just went, so that was on the Friday night. And on the Saturday I went down to the local pub, which is like Thirsk is a small community and everyone knows. And I just went out on the Saturday like nothing had happened. I was just on the drink, just constantly brandy. I was drinking brandy. And my dad, like that day, there was a big horse race. I can't remember which race it was, the Guineas or something. And one of our local trainers, I'm really good friends with his son, Kevin Ryan, Adam Ryan's son. And the Grey Gatsby was running. And my dad was adamant that this horse was going to win. He was really fancied it. And I think he had about 100 quid left in his pocket. So I thought, just for my dad, I'm just going to put this money on. And he finised third in the end, which was the story of our lives. But I carried on drinking. And then it wasn't until maybe about 4 or 5 o'clock-ish, you know, I just wasn't getting drunk, so I got on the sniff.
Had you taken cocaine before that?
I took it a lot, but more as a recreational thing.
Yeah.
So it was a recreational thing. But then I just got on it now just to keep going. But then, so it went all day Saturday, went back to a house party on the Saturday, all day Sunday. back out till the Sunday night, and we had funeral arrangements on the Monday, which I was meant to go with my mum with. And I was still partying, I was drinking just to try and numb what was going on in me. And, oh, God, the amount of brandy, cocaine, I dread to think how much we took. And on the Monday, I was slowly starting to, like, kick in a little bit, like, fucking hell, I need to go sort my shit out. And I always remember, it was about 9 o'clock at night, and I walked through and seen my mum, and I just had the biggest fucking breakdown ever. And, I just gave her the biggest hug, and I just cried and cried and cried and cried. And my mum's fantastic. My mum, she's always been my best friend, but she's an absolute gem. If anything was to ever happen to her, God, it'd kill me. And she says, don't worry, we're in this together. But the thing is, my dad had left a suicide note. And in the suicide note this was when I'd actually found him. Sorry, I've had to do this, Ross. I don't want to be here. I love you to bits. Don't ever blame yourself. And at the bottom of that list, it said, don't let that cunt at my funeral, meaning my mum.
Oh, wow.
I knew deep down that my dad didn't mean that.
Yeah.
And my mum was heartbroken when she seen it, but she knew that wasn't my dad. So we'd made all the funeral arrangements, and I always remember we went to the police station once they'd done all the tests and stuff, and it did come back that he'd taken his own life, which was quite obvious anyway. But the police officer said to me, he was like, "Are you going to stick by your dad wishes and not let your mum at the funeral?" And I looked at him and I said, "Not a fucking chance." I said, "She's going to be stood there at the front of that funeral with me." And we did, so we made all the plans. So the hardest thing was he had 51 grand in the December. In the July, there was 2 grand left. So it wasn't, I wasn't bothered how much was left. This was all going on the funeral. But it kind of sunk in a bit. The reason he's done it is because he spent all this money. It's a lot of money to spend in the space of 4 or 5 months. Yeah.
And what was he spending? Was it because obviously you said about alcohol? What else?
Just he never really took drugs. Just alcohol and gambling.
Of course, yeah.
Gambling. So when he wasn't working during the day. I kept the business running, but we had like this system going where we put some money in the betting account, and my dad was fantastic with like following stats and everything else. And we had this betting account, and we had it built up to, I think we had about 3.5 grand in there. And he went to Thirst Races on the Saturday. So I was doing the betting like with him while he was at the races, and I noticed 2 grand went out of the account. So I rang him up. I said, "What the fuck are you doing?" He said, "I've just had a tip for this horse." I said, "We never go off tips," and that horse got beat. So that money was gone. So I think he started chasing it again.
Yeah, it's quickly how quick it can spiral out chasing your losses.
I think the more you have as well, the more you will bet.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Once drink and drugs are involved, you think you're unstoppable. So if you've got 20 grand there, you think, "Oh, sorry, I'll have this money on it." So because the money had gone, I think that had gone into him. But so there was 2,200 and something left. And I was going to make sure he had the best send-off ever. So we put it all into the funeral costs. I even had his coffin wrapped in like a horse racing theme. It was lovely. It was really, really good.
Just going back to, obviously, the comment he made about your mum being at the funeral. And by the sounds of it, the separation, life spiraling out of control for him. Did your mum feel responsible in any way?
My mum blames herself to this day.
Really?
She blames herself to this day. Oh God, it's so tough just to, when we sit and talk about him and stuff, she does blame herself. But I've said to her, "Mum, it's your life, So she's got a tattoo, my life, my choice, and then she's got the semicolon thing, which is for suicide, and she has that tattoo there for her. And I said, you need to stick by that. But I know she blames herself to this day for my dad.
Yeah, but the thing is with working in a substance misuse service like ours, we often see threats of suicide a lot. The reality is we can only do so much. You talked about getting like the Samaritan's number and things like that. There's only so much information, but we always say at the end of the day, if somebody wants to kill themselves, that is their decision, isn't it?
It's funny you should say that, because I had a chat with my mum on Monday, and I said to her, if I knew what I know now through like mental health and suicide and stuff, I think I could have done a lot more for Dad.
Yeah.
And my mum stopped me and she said, Ross, she said it was heartwarming, but she said, Ross, you'd have never saved your dad. He had it in his mind to do it, so don't ever blame yourself. And it was a really, really like heart to heart with her. But it kind of settled in, you know, as much as I do know today about the awareness of mental health and suicide, yeah, he had it in his mind. He was always going to do it. And I think as well, it's tough, but I think he's at peace. He is at peace, and I think that's the main thing. It's still fucking hard, don't get me wrong, it's really hard. But when I go visit his graveside now, I think, you know, he's at peace now. I can sit there, I can have a chat with him. Whereas for about 8 years before, the only time I'd go see him is when I'd have a drink or occasions and stuff, and that was just a trigger for me.
Yeah.
But the hardest thing, and it's still hard to this day, so obviously Father's Day is at the end of June.
Yeah.
The anniversary of his death is on July the 3rd, and then his birthday is in August.
So you've got a rough couple of months in summer.
In the space of, 5-6 weeks, I've got all them to deal with, and I always use them as a trigger. So my own mental health, I've fueled with drink and drugs. It was like, that was my mask. But it's only been the past 2 years where I've actually can go up there now and I can sit and like relax and have a chat with him. And the nicest thing is so where the graveside is, the Thirsk Racecourse is literally nearby. And it was only on his anniversary this year that I went and sat up, and there was a night meeting on at Thirsk. So I could hear the commentary of the horses, and it was really peaceful. Yeah. It was lovely to sit and chat, and nice, you know, that's what he'd like.
I think with your dad as well, do you know, when we say about it being the choice, it sounds like he really was ready to make that decision, because obviously he made the attempt with the tramadol not long before, and often when speaking with survivors of suicide attempts, I always find it interesting that a lot of people who do survive it almost have that clarity or realization when they do survive, is actually, I never wanted to die, I just wanted to stop feeling the way I did.
Yeah.
Now, you woke him up from that, you helped him through, you know, the possibility of an overdose there, but he still wanted to make that decision. So if he hadn't had that clarity after the first one, I think that shows that he truly wanted to do what he wanted to do.
I was due to, on the Saturday, I was due to go for a night out in Yarm. And I said if I'd have managed to save him that day, what's saying it wouldn't have done it that day. He did have it in his mind. And it wasn't until a year after the anniversary, because I think it was a week after the funeral, I went straight back to work. And I got on, I was just going about like my everyday life, and I was just tunnel vision, you know, keep this business going. And you know what, I was thinking this before I came in and did this podcast. Who said this to me? But they said, look, just be careful. You know, you're doing too well at the moment. It's going to come crashing down. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I can't remember for the love of God who said it, but fuck me, were they right? Jesus. So it wasn't until the year anniversary, I was doing absolutely fine. And then the year's anniversary came, and it just, the realisation set in, you know, I'm never going to get to see my dad again. I'm never going to get to hug him, see him on Father's Day, go racing with him. And I remember I'd gone out on a Thursday night and I'd got absolutely hammered. And on the Friday morning, I came back in just after everyone had gone to work, my mum and her partner. And it was about 20:08. Obviously I'd been on a drink and everything, and I took all my tablets, and I'd left a note. And that was me. That was. I don't know if it was a cry for help. It wasn't necessarily that I didn't want to be here, but it was like, I can't live without my dad.
Yeah.
So yeah, I woke up in intensive care. The girlfriend I was with at the time, she'd messaged my mum. My mum would come round, and that's when it was my first suicide attempt. It was my first involvement with going through counselling, going on medication and stuff. And I was starting to do all right. I did a thing called EMDR, which is like, it's similar to hypnotism. That's what she said when I began it. It's all your thoughts in your mind. So all I could picture was my dad hanging from this beam with this yellow tow rope, and it always stuck in my head. So transferring the thoughts, she said, you are in control, but it is like hypnotism. So what you had to do was picture a happy place. So my happy place was just what I imagined was nice crystal ocean, white beach, and a veranda. And I even got a picture just around, I think it was from the Maldives, and I put it as my screensaver. So what I had to do was go back from 3 traumas in my life. So the first one being obviously traumatic, but not so traumatic, then something a bit more intense, and then obviously we'll get to your dad. So my first one, I was in a car accident when I was 23, 24. So that was my traumatic time. So I pictured that, and then I pictured my happy place. And what I had to do, I had to follow her fingers like this. And what it was doing, it was transferring the thoughts from your part to your brain. Amazing stuff. And
it worked.
This was working. This was doing fantastic. But you'd come out and because they said, don't drive or anything after it, because you did come out feeling like almost a bit like hypnotism.
Yeah.
It was like your whole body was like, oh God, this is unreal. And my second session was, I was when I dislocated my knee playing cricket. And again, doing the same thing from a traumatic time to this. And then the last one, so I think I did about 3 months of it. And the last one was picturing my dad, going back to your happy place. And this was the hardest session. And I came out and I was just, God, it was like, Jesus, I've done this. I'm fine now. And I went for a pint in the pub. And the first guy I saw came up and told me, so this guy, Errol, was good friends with my dad through racing, through everything. And I always remember at the funeral, he said, I can't believe Martin's done this. It's so selfish. I'd never do that.
Yeah.
And it is hard to hear, but until you've been through it yourself, it's not selfish at all.
No.
You know, it's not a coward's way out. Anyway, so I walked into...
I hate that term with stuff like suicide, coward's way out,
Yeah. So as I walked into the pub, one of the locals came up to me. The first thing he said, have you heard about Errol? I said, no. He said, he's hung himself today. I was like, you are joking. I said, I've just done my worst session, the hardest session of EMDR.
Yeah.
And then Errol, after what he said to me at the funeral, and now he's done it. And it was like, fucking hell, how much more of this can I take?
He must have been fighting his demons then. He must have been telling himself, don't do it, it's a coward's way out, almost as a way to try and think his own mind. And then he succumbed to it himself eventually as well.
Exactly.
Jeez.
And it was just so tough. But the CMDR helped the counselling. I went through PTSD counselling, and then I've done all sorts, bereavement, everything. And then I was on the tablets. I was on the metazapine, so they were helping me sleep on the night, and then obviously helping my mood and stuff. So this was grand for about 4 years, and then COVID hit, and that was I lived on my own at the point. And then I lost my granddad, which was my dad's dad. So as you can imagine, all this set triggers back.
Yeah.
And I just started drinking more, and I was using drugs. But it was always cocaine. Cocaine was always my choice. But it was a case of I'd start on a Thursday nights here, but then I never wanted it to end. Not because I was a party animal, because I'd be sat like in my kitchen on my own, having a line, having a drink, and I didn't want it to end because I knew what was coming. So I think I did 4 and a bit days in total, but just drinking and then just listening to Irish music and stuff. And it was starting to take a bit of a toll on me. But no one knew. I didn't tell anyone. I just hid it all, hid behind the mask. I was going to work. I was turning up at work at like 10:30 and then working, till about 6, 7. And it's like getting out of bed. Even if I wasn't hungover, getting out of bed was the hardest thing. And that was the depression side, I shower twice a day. I brush my teeth twice a day. I'd lay in bed for like 3 days, and I'd just get up for a piss. I wouldn't eat or anything. And it was tough. And it wasn't until when I started drinking and taking drugs, then you could hide behind all this pain and you could like go with the life and soul of the party. But deep down, you're just masking it.
Yeah.
And no one's seen that. No one's seen it at all. So that was then the second time. But the second time I tried to take my own life, I had it planned. I just went about my normal day. And I remember just set up in my kitchen. I had a marble chopping board because I love my cooking. But this marble chopping board was mainly used for lines of cocaine than chopping food on. And I remember, and I was taking cocaine, drinking, and I wrote a suicide note. I thought, I just can't deal with this anymore. At this time, I don't want to be here.
What's that like to be at that point where you were ready to? I've had some very low moments, and I think most people at some point have thought about suicide, but I've never got to the point where I feel like I'm writing my last letter, my last words to someone. What's that experience like, being at that point, and how did you feel when you was actually writing it?
I think the main thing is fueling it with the drink and drugs, because when I was sober, you could almost try and manage with it and think, right, come on, you can sort yourself out.
Yeah.
But I think the drink and drugs, obviously, you're just bringing back things. I'm putting on Irish music. I'm fueling it all myself. So I remember writing this note mainly to my mum, and tears were just streaming down my face. And this was the first, because I think the first time was maybe like a cry for help. I need help here. I didn't know what the effects of taking my tablets was going to do.
Because what's the gap between the first attempt and the second attempt?
The first one was a year after the anniversary, started in 2016. And then the next one, like I said, I was fine.
Yeah.
Well, not fine, still dealing
I get what you mean.
But
yeah.
the COVID, so I think it was 2021, so it was a good 4
still
years.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was the gap. But yeah, writing the note, and I left my sliding patio door open on my house, and I went upstairs, and I put all my dad's funeral photos out and stuff, and I'd taken all my box of prescription pills, the metazapines, I don't know how many's in the thing, mixed with the alcohol and the cocaine, and I wrote my mum. I messaged her and just said, the back door's open, I'm so sorry. And now my mum, I think it's about 6:15 in the morning, my mum just so happened to have got up for a wee at that time, and read her phone, and she was round at my house within minutes. And then I was rushed off into hospital, and again intensive care. Woke up, wires all out of me. I'm having to see a psychiatrist. Then we're talking about my medication. It had to be monitored, so my mum had to have my medication from then on, and give me
course,
2 at a time, because
just to prevent you from trying to do it again,
maybe.
Yeah.
But still, I never spoke about it, and then so I went for my second or third batch of counselling. I think this was bereavement counselling. And then
can I just go back to when you text your mum? Was there an intention of, you need to come and help me right now? Or was that truly I'm sorry and a goodbye?
It was a sorry and a goodbye.
Yeah.
Like I wrote in the note, and it wasn't a, you need to come and help me right now. I didn't want to be here. That was my final straw. I'm done. I can't deal with this. I'm causing I'm causing my mum stress, because she just thought I was a fucking session. She thought I had a drink and a drug problem, which, don't get me wrong, I've had some fantastic times on drink and drugs. I've been at stag do's, with the footy lads and stuff. I've met some of my best friends. But when you're using it for the wrong reasons, just to hide behind it all,
especially those substances, I think things like cocaine are the type of drugs that you use in those party environments with friends, in a recreational way. I think there is that moment when you're doing that stuff by yourself where it's like, okay, the party's stopped now.
The party's stopped now.
Yeah.
I remember sat up for 2 days on my own. It was nice because no one was asking for a line and no one was bumming cigarettes off you, But I thought, what are you doing here? You're literally scrolling through Facebook, you're going through all your social media, you're listening to songs that are triggering your heads,
Purposely putting yourself in that place.
I was feeling it
myself.
I was feeling it, but the reason I was doing it is because I knew what was coming. So obviously, what goes up must come down. But with my down was a lot further down because I was hiding behind a lot of fucking hurt. So yeah, I did. I fueled it myself. And like I said, looking back, I only really had myself to blame. But I was doing it because I didn't want to talk about it. Even though I was doing my counselling, I was telling them my problems. I was telling no one else my problems. And I went through North Yorkshire Horizons as well, monitoring my drink intake. And I thought, so I was doing the right things, but I wasn't really putting them into practice. So
you're just going through the motions of it as opposed to...
Going through the emotions, yeah, exactly. And it's almost like, oh, God, poor me, this has happened. But I'd give off great advice to people about mental health and stuff. I would never put into practice myself.
I think that's most people. How many of us? I always say I can give really good advice.
Yeah.
But Christ, when the chips are down for myself, I'm like, I don't know what to do.
Exactly,
do you know what I mean?
100%.
And trying to put myself in other people's situations, it's like, you just need to do this. And I think that's most people. That's not just yourself. Most people would be able to relate to that.
Yeah, definitely. So that was. So when was that? COVID, and then again, I was struggling. I was really struggling. And the worst part was, so my dad's side of the family are Irish. So I went over to Islands, January 2023. And I thought, this is me going back, seeing my family. This is going to help me and, you know, bring all the love back. This is going to be my excuse to go over to Ireland, because literally you're 40 minutes on a plane, and we've got a big family in Ireland, and it's a beautiful part of the country in County Mayo on the west coast. And it had the complete opposite effect. I came back from that I went for 4 days. I came back, and it just, oh my God, it just brought back all the trauma, all the love. And I hit an all-time worst. I was fucking drinking and taking cocaine every other night for 3-4 nights on end. I was really struggling, really struggling. So this was in the January. So then up until the April the 20th, I'd gone out on the Friday, and I was hurting so bad. I remember I never drank vodka, never ever. And I got a full bottle of vodka, and I was sat in my house just drinking vodka, but I was not taking drugs. I thought, I'm just going to get absolutely shit-faced here. And then that was it. I don't remember anything more other than I came out of a coma 2 days later. I was in intensive care, ICU 2 in James Cook in Middlesbrough. They were fantastic. And I woke up. My mum's next to me. She's in absolute floods of tears. I've got wires, tubes, everything coming out of me. And what I'd done is I'd hung myself from my stairs at home. So that was me. That was my life done. I was jokes. I'd got absolutely blackout drunk. I couldn't remember any of it. So it wasn't until my mum, she didn't really say what had happened, but my girlfriend, my ex-girlfriend at the time, I was messaging her, and she'd messaged my mum saying, I think Ross needs your help. My mum was coming round that day anyway to give me a bollocking, as she said. But she usually goes to my grandma's on a Saturday afternoon, and that day she just didn't. So she walked into the house and seen me hanging, and she had to cut me down and try and save my life. So it wasn't until... So I'm laid in hospital, and then my mum's there next to me. She's telling me briefly what had happened. You know, you're lucky to be here. And then some results came back, my test results, to check if I'd been brain damaged. And they came back positive. So I couldn't remember anything. And I always remember that night when I came out of my intensive care, like out of my coma. I was laid there, and I was in a room. There was 4 of us. And this always stands out to me, this. The nurses had come, and they had like a massive sheet of paper stood, and they were watching individually, like for every 10 minutes or so, and just sat staring, and they were monitoring if there's any finger movement, any eye twitches, because these guys are like fighting for their lives. And I remember saying to my mum when she came in the next day, I was like, I'm just mesmerised by what they're doing. She said, they were doing that for you, Ross. She said, we weren't sure if you were going to make it or not. Anyway, I seen a psychiatrist on the Tuesday, and then I got discharged. And I always remember, as I walked out of intensive care, the nurse said to me, do you know what, Ross, you don't realise how lucky you are, because not many people walk off this ward. And that always sticks in my head, that. And when I finally got home, I just don't know what it was. It was so tough. I thought, what the fuck's happened? You know, what have I done here? This is exactly what your dad did, and look what it did to you, and your poor mother's here.
You're putting somebody else through the possibility of everything that you've gone through.
Everything I've been through. And the person I was doing it to was the best rock of my life, is my mother. So when I finally got home, I turned my phone on. And obviously, I'm quite, not sounding like a big head, but I'm quite well known around Thirsk, and everyone knows.
A lot of messages, a lot of concern.
So I remember, I turned it on, and I remember it coming on, and it was like I'd just set it to vibrate, because every single message was coming through, whether it's through Facebook, text message, Snapchat. So after about 15 minutes, once it finally stopped vibrating, I went on, And I thought, you know what? Every single person that's messaged me, I'm going to message them back individually.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I sat down and I started messaging everyone individually. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. Means a lot. And so I started at 10 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't just constant. I'd had my dinner and stuff in between. Yeah. And I sent my last message at 11 o'clock at night, just thanking everyone. Oh, this bit's funny. This bit gets me here. And the one message that stood out for me was from my mum. And that message said, I know you can't read this, Ross, but will you please open your eyes so I can tell you how much I love you? And reading that message was just enough just to say, do you know what? You sort yourself out now. Yeah. That was the hardest bit, and that always sticks by me, that my mum was laid by my side, not knowing if I was going to make it or not. For her to have to message me, said, and that breaks me up every time.
It shows where her mind is as well, because at that moment, she's sending that message thinking, you're never going to read that.
I'm never going to read it.
But that's the kind of like where how irrational your mind is in that situation. You're just doing anything. And I suppose looking at a previous message from you, writing a message out to you, feels like you're in communication with you, despite you being in that situation that she's currently looking at. That's heartbreaking.
That's the bit that always stands out. And I remember just sat there, right, after messaging all these people back, and I'd seen like all the love and support, and it's like, you've got a second chance at life now. Look at what you've nearly left behind. Look at what you've put your mother through, my grandma, everything else. And that was, something just came across me. I was like, right, I'm going to go sober. I'm going to stop the drink. I'm going to stop the drugs. I'm going to get myself sorted. I'm going to get sunk into work. And this part of my recovery story, I always remember. So this was on the Tuesday. So on the Thursday, I went back to the church, and I'd never been back to that church since I buried my dad. Mm. And I spoke to the priest, lovely guy. I said, I told him my story, what happened. And he remembers, obviously, my dad's funeral. And he was like, look, Ross, he said, we're always here for you. He said, sit at the back of the church, have as much time as you want. And I remember, like, I'm not religious at all. You know, I used to go with my dad to the Catholic church as a kid and stuff. Yeah. Obviously, the Irish side of the family are massive religious. Obviously, there's beliefs and stuff there. And I remember just sat at the back of the church, and I just took it all in. And I just prayed to, obviously my dad, he's kept me here. You know, how the hell he used to live. So my dad's, I was sat in there for about 20 minutes. And I walked up to the big oak doors as I walked out, and I blessed myself with holy water. And this could almost be a scene on like a movie. I opened the doors, and the sun was just beaming down. And I remember saying to myself, your new life starts now. And I stuck by it. I went straight back to work. So I was discharged on the Tuesday. So I went back to work on the following Monday. And everyone's like, God, are you okay? And all this stuff. And I was sticking to it. And a lot of people doubted me. A lot of people did think, Joy, you'd never be able to do it. I never thought in a million years. I loved having a drink. I loved having a line. I'm not going to lie. I loved the interaction, and I was a life and soul. But when you're using it for the wrong reasons, I'm going to stop fueling my mental health, and I'm going to start over again. So I was posting bits about my journey, you know, so it's like, so I downloaded an I Am Sober app. So I was posted like the 1 month sober, the 2 month sober. And I kept posting it. One, to try and help others. And two, this is the massive two, basically to say fuck you to all the people who are doubting me here. And I kept going. And I remember when I got to the 6 months marker, I'd been discharged from everything. So obviously the crisis team had to come and see me. They came 3 times a week for the first 3 weeks. And then they came twice a week and then once a week. So I was getting discharged. I was still using my horizons and my counselling. And after 6 months, I'd been discharged. And I always remember the crisis team guy, because I'd seen about 3 or 4 different people. And the guy that came to discharge me, he said, you know what, Ross, it is an absolute pleasure to come and discharge you today. He said, I don't think you realise, but you're the talk of the team at the moment. Yeah. He said, that what you're doing. And that was like a self-joy. Yeah. You felt proud about it.
Absolutely,
you know?
Yeah.
It was a massive thing. So the 6 months came, I was just tunnel vision. I wanted to build the business back up, because I did nearly piss it into the ground. Yeah. Every excuse under the sun for why you don't turn up and stuff. So I was mindset with that. And I carried on working, and I got back into my cricket, which I used to play as a kid, and throughout the years got back into that and had a good season, and I was just doing everything right. But yeah, once I was discharged off everything, got to the year's sobriety, and it was like a massive achievement. And it was also, I'd been back to Ireland as well. Sadly, we'd lost my great auntie, and she was like the backbone of the McAndrew family, you know. And I'd gone back to an emotional time. I'd seen people I'd not seen for 20 years, and I'd still stayed sober. And so that was a massive trigger. But then again, 3 months later, I lost my grandma, which was my dad's mum. So that's like the McAndrew side wiped out. And I was like, God, if I was ever going to relapse, you know, now would be it. But I just kept mindset. I did just keep going, you know, and I didn't really have any triggers. I'd go out, I'd still be my normal self. I'd drink the Guinness Zero, if I can promote that.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. And I still socialised. I did, however, realise that I don't have a filter. You know, it wasn't through the drink and the drugs.
Yeah.
You know, I'm still the same without it. But yeah, things were just happening. Like I said, a lot of death of my great auntie, my grandma. And I got in a relationship. It was a girl about 2 months after I'd come out of hospital. And it was a girl that I'd kind of fancied for years. And she stood by me. And she was sober for 8 months. She stood by me, but then that started to hit the rocks a little bit because she started drinking again. And it wasn't that I had an issue with it. Just
got to look after yourself.
You've got to look after yourself, yeah. And just a few things like arose and stuff. But like I say, I ain't going to sit here and slag it off or anything. Do you know? I did, and I really did love it. And it was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. It was in the July, and I had to walk away from that relationship purely because I had to think of myself. I don't get me wrong, I loved the bones off her, and it was tough. So I've got all this stuff to deal with, but I'm managing it with so much easier. The anniversaries came with my dad's, you know, the Father's Day and everything, and I was just focusing on them, and I was just handling them so much better. And I was just so headstrong. I was in such a good place. I'm posting everything. I'm trying to inspire people. You know, I've got people stopping me in the street saying, God, Ross, where you've come from is just, you know, it's unbelievable.
Especially with as you said, with First being such a small community, everyone's kind of knowing everybody and so on,
The thing is as well, like everyone did know their own business, but I thought I'm going to post it. So I put some really deep posts out about what had happened, and how I was doing it, and, you know, trying to really help mental health and suicide, make sure no one gets into that stage again. And it was really getting noticed. It was brilliant. And like I said, the year anniversary came, that was fantastic. I made all them moves. And then in the September of last year, I was 16 months sober. And one of my friends from Thirsk, he said, look, there's this, which I'm going to speak about now, is there's this club that raises awareness for men's mental health, AndysManClub. So I thought, right, yeah, I'll come along. I didn't know what it was about or anything, and I'll try and inspire others with my story.
Had you heard of it before, AndysManClub? Or was
Do you know what? It's funny because when I came out of hospital, a guy in our local gave me this band. And I think it's his sister, had been to a young lad who had committed suicide, and his mum had said, give Ross this band. So I had this band on, and I knew nothing about it. Obviously, I was going through my crisis team and everything else, so I was sticking by my recovery, but I didn't really know anything about it. So I went to the first one along in Ripon with Dave, and I found myself sat there with a group of people. You know, I'm here as, you know, as far as I'm concerned, you know, I'm pretty all right.
Yeah,
but you've got people coming through here for the first time who were fucking shitting themselves, you know. Yeah. And it wasn't until I sat down, so the ins and outs of AndysManClub, you get a brew and everything, and you sit down in a big circle, and it all begins with question 0, it's called. So it's like, explain who you are and why you come to AndysManClub. So I kind of use my, you know, I've dealt with this since losing my dad, blah, 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 blah. I've gone sober, this, that, and the other. And then we get split into 2 groups. And then the 3 questions are always the same. How's your week been? What's the positive or highlight of your week? And anything to get off your chest. So I found myself sat there answering these questions normal, and then the anything to get off your chest. And I told these strangers that I'd met, half an hour ago, I'm telling them my story, and I find myself crying, like breaking down. And each and every one of these guys, they've all got their own individual problems. They're so supportive. And I thought, I've come to try and inspire others, yet they're inspiring me while I'm doing this, getting it off my chest. So it can get quite deep on them, on that anything to get off your chest. So that's why after the break, they really try and concentrate. So there's question 4 and 5. And them questions are a bit more light-hearted, what's your favourite biscuit, favourite crisp in the sarnie? And the importance of that is to leave on a high. So I left this first AndysManClub thinking, this is fucking brilliant. This is absolutely brilliant. Everyone's got their own individual story to tell. And I remember someone saying, God, I thought I didn't realise my story was anything bad at all compared to listening to you. But what one of the facilitators at Ripon, and Andy, he's called.
Does everyone think it's his club?
Yeah, well, that's it.
I can imagine, yeah.
He says, I'm not the Andy. But he says it's not a pissing contest.
Yeah.
So each and every one has got a problem. It doesn't matter what you're going through. And I understand that. So what's happened to my dad is, it's horrendous. But in my eyes, it's no different if someone loses a dad for cancer or for a car crash. You've still got that trauma and heartache of what you're going through. So that was the first encounter of the club. And when I left, I felt buzzing, absolutely buzzing. And then obviously the Monday came after. And I remember one guy stopping me and he said, you know what, Ross, I've come back because you've inspired me to come back. And I said, you know what, it's fantastic to hear that. It is really nice. And I always put on my posts and stuff, like the journey and stuff. And I always put on it, I don't do this for the red carpet treatment. I don't want the red carpet. I don't want smoke blown in my ass. I do it to try and help others. Yeah, because I don't want anyone to be at rock bottom.
You've experienced it. You know what it's like. You don't want anyone to feel the way you've ever felt.
Don't want anyone to ever feel it.
And that's completely understandable, though, yeah.
Ever.
Just on the topic of these groups, because they are really well attended groups, aren't they? I think with the subject of mental health and our own mental health being such a deep subject, how do you get through? Like, how does everyone get a chance to talk? Do you have a set amount of time that you're allowed to check in? I'd imagine I'd go to one of these, you'd have, say, 25 people there, and it'd get round to me, and I'd be like, oh, bloody hell, we've been here 2 hours. Do you know what I mean? How does it work, I suppose? Just the logistics of it.
So we all sit, so on the first group at Ripon, I think there was 25, 26.
So a lot of people, yeah.
A lot of people. Yeah. So we, like I said, it's a brief introduction of yourself and everything you've been through, and that's the reason we split into 2 groups. I think some of the places are getting over 30, so they split into 3 groups. Yeah, so you've got your facilitators who kind of run the groups. And they always try and say, Joe, the question 1 and 2, how has your week been? And then positives, try and get through them quickly. Don't get me wrong, there's some people who like to go on.
You sometimes see it in our circles. It's like I deliver training, and I'm like, do you just want to go around and introduce yourself? And next thing, someone's doing a share, and I'm like, well, hang about, mate. Do you know, I only need to know your name and a little bit, but I think naturally people can just, especially when it's important to them. And it's hard because you don't want to interrupt someone when what they're saying is important to them. I've often wondered, like obviously you've got to be a good facilitator, I imagine, to be able to appropriately cut people off.
We spoke about that, and there's a list of rules at the beginning, which talks about obviously no preaching, no talking about medication, not this and the other. And it does say if a facilitator does interrupt you, don't take it personally. It's just so we can get through it all.
Absolutely, yeah.
So as you say, anything to get off your chest can get quite deep sometimes.
I can imagine,
but you can be sat there and you can be clock watching, because the importance of getting them last 2 questions in is so you leave on a high. Because if you're in a group and you've just listened to all these
shitload of trauma, you're going to go out there thinking, fuck, do you know what I mean? You're gonna... coming out worse than I've come in, do you know? Yeah.
So that's the highlight of them. So you do get a bit of a clock watch, but you do have the full 2 hours, and we like to get a bit of a break, whether it's 5 minutes. But if we get to, say, for instance, at 20 to 9, and we've still got the next 2 questions, we'll just go straight into them, because that's the highlight of them. Yeah. So that was 4 weeks, 4 sessions I'd done, and then we got put forward for facilitator training. which was brilliant and a massive achievement.
Yeah.
So the guy Dave from Thirsk, who got me involved with all this, he wanted to get one set up in Thirsk. So I was like, yeah, I'm all for it. We scoped around looking for places because you've got a list of requirements. No open bars, has to be on a Monday. Separate rooms, etc., etc. So we took some serious time scoping out a lot of places in Thirsk, and we just couldn't find anywhere. Yeah. And we were expecting, like maybe May, June, July, we'd get a club in Thirsk. But then our area lead, Elliot, he said, his exact words were, "I love your too fucking commitment. I'm going to give you a club in January." So we were like, Jesus God, we've only been going for a few months. And we got our first club. It was on Monday, just opened on Monday. And it's nerve-wracking because we've had all this preparation, all this time looking for places. Is anyone going to turn up? We knew we had 4 facilitators there, so there's 4 of us that are definitely going to be there. And thankfully we got the support from some of the guys from the other clubs, lads from Rip and Kem, one of the guys from Harrogate Kem. And I remember you've got a sweeper. So the sweeper is a guy who walks on the car park after the session starts. So that's purely because people sat in the car, they're nervous.
Yeah, that'd be me. I'd get to somewhere, and I've done that to a few things before. I've just sat in my car and then I've made up an excuse and I've gone, "Oh fuck it, I'm going home." So that's a really good idea to have that.
Do you know what?
That's an incredible idea.
The amount of people who have said, even the facilitators at Ripon, right? Dave, for instance, he said, the first time I drove past, I sat in the car park, I didn't want to go in, and I get that because. Walking, there's nothing more nerve-wracking. You've got your own individual problems, and you're going to go share them in front of people that you don't know. But the importance of the facilitators are obviously to have a chat with them, and then take you in. They do make you feel welcome, introduce you to everyone. So having that importance role of the club it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So it's like 6:30, and it's like 2 people turned up, and I was like, oh fucking hell, I hope. But still, 2 people is better than none. You're helping 2 people. And I went and made a brew, and I came out, and the whole room was just absolutely packed.
Well, because Sweeper went out and got them all up the cars, was it?
Elliot was sweeping, so he came in with a couple, but they came in dribs and drabs. And there was 29 in attendance.
That's incredible.
And it was, honest to God, it was just the achievement. It was like, wow, we think this is going to do brilliant.
And a lot of them were first-time attendees, I imagine.
There was 22 for the first time.
That's incredible.
Guys had come, one of the guys had come from Yarm, which is about half an hour away, and it was good. And it was the first sign I thought, this is going to do all right. This is, it's the thing is, because Thirsk's a small knit town. I always made this joke: if you fart in one pub, you go into the next pub, you shit yourself. Yeah, do you know what I mean? That's what it's like. Yeah. So I literally had to highlight the fact that everything that happens in the club stays in the club. There's no judgment. It's confidential, and because there's nothing worse than thinking you're going to walk into a club and the next one Tom, Dick and Harry's talking about you in the pub. But we really highlight that.
The confidentiality.
The confidentiality is key. Yeah. It is key.
Just talking about this, I think one of the things, and it's quite, the term toxic masculinity is used a lot, but the idea that men shouldn't share their feelings, that men should be strong and this, that and the other, which of course, in my opinion, is bullshit.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? I think it takes a stronger man to talk about the things that bother him than to bottle them up. What would you say to someone who had that opinion of, men shouldn't be sitting around a group sharing their feelings and whatnot?
I think what I'd have to say to him is, have you been through it yourself? I think that's the main thing. Have you had depression? Have you lost someone from suicide? Have you been close to someone who's lost someone? I think until you've been through that yourself, you can have an opinion on everything. Of course, there's a free speech everywhere. But until you've actually been in there and done it yourself, then you'll never realise, because some people will say, oh, God, sat there with a group of guys just rattling on, But yeah, it's not like that at all. And I use one guy, for instance, and he won't mind me saying it all because I use him. My positive most weeks is seeing this guy called Andrew. And so he came in the first week and he was a wreck, an absolute wreck. And 2-3 weeks after, don't get me wrong, he's still hurting with the trauma that's happened in his life. But he's talking out, he's promoting the club himself. And so he's giving all these first timers like an idea of what it's like. And God, I almost gave him my facilitator jumper on Monday because he said, my name's Andrew. I've been this. After my first session, it was like a 20-ton lift off my shoulders. And it's not until you hear people who have been through that. So I guess unless anyone's really been into it and like they can say what they want about it, but they don't really have an idea.
Don't judge until you've walked a mile in the shoes.
Exactly.
Sort of thing.
Yeah.
I think that's the saying anyway. Could be wrong.
Yeah.
No, I think it's incredible to have it, and I mean, I myself, I struggled a lot when my daughter was first born. I felt really overwhelmed by the responsibilities of being a dad, and I remember looking into the AndysManClub thing, and the reason why I didn't go is because I just felt I felt guilty leaving my wife with the baby.
Yeah.
But it was, at the time, I remember reading stories online that people were sharing of, about how the club had helped them. And it was really that point where I thought I should really go to something like this.
Yeah.
And I referred myself for mental health support. And by the time mental health support actually got back in touch with me to do my triage, I was like, it's been 3 months, I'm fine now.
Yeah.
I made that referral when she was just a few days old, when I was like overwhelmed to like, I can't do this. And then by the time mental health support got in touch with me, I was like, no, I'm fine now. But there was an element where I thought I could just go to this meeting today. And that's how quick it can be. Do you know what I mean? You don't have to wait I know I'm not saying you guys are professionals in that sense, but for that peer-to-peer support element, when waiting lists for mental health can be so long, there's a meeting on a week-by-week basis, sometimes multiple meetings a week, just fucking go. Do you know what I mean?
Before, it's funny you say that, because before we were getting all like set up for Thirsk, we had to do a video, me and Dave, just try and say what AndysManClub was about. And that's what I said. I said, we aren't counsellors, we aren't therapy. I'm a painter and decorator. But just come along. And that's when I had the chat with my grandma. She was a social worker for years in Middlesbrough. And I asked her about like mental health, has it always been around? And she said, obviously, when the Mental Health Act was introduced, it was a case of get into a straitjacket, into a padded room and all that. And like I said, since my dad, like the thing of mental health is just everywhere now. So I never really heard about it.
Somebody said something along the lines to me before, which I thought was interesting, was that mental health is it's so pushed now that encouraging people to talk about mental health will lead to a mental health crisis. And I didn't get what he meant at the time, but I think you're kind of seeing that now, in the sense of, because everyone's so open about the mental health and talking about it and wanting to receive support for it, that's when the waiting times for mental health support naturally is getting longer and longer and longer.
Yeah.
Because the differences between feeling depressed and having depression, feeling anxious and having anxiety. And I think having those meetings again is a massive help to really kind of like hold up the support system and helping people maybe until to the point of where they get like I suppose a clinical or a medical intervention in terms of mental health as well. So I don't think it can be understated how important groups like what you have are, really, is in the wider community as well.
Yeah, they are massive. And like you said, we've all got regular jobs, we're just volunteers. But in the rules before, it said the only time we'll go out and talk about, so if, say, for instance, someone comes in and they're going to cause harm to themselves or to anyone else, but then we will talk about and try and get them referred. But like they say, this is like a peer-to-peer talking group. But we always list out, the Samaritans and everything else if you do need...
Yeah, if you need further support.
Support at the time. But do you know what? It's unbelievable. I never thought in a million years that a group of lads just sat having a cup of tea, dunking a biscuit in, talking about the problems. And the thing that sticks out to me, there's a couple of guys that have come in saying, I've heard all these stories. I've got a good wife. I've got a good job. I've got kids. But there's something that's keeping me... from anxiety, for instance, that I have to come to these clubs, and it doesn't matter what problem you've got. It doesn't matter. It's causing your life stress. So, like I say, it doesn't care that Tom.
It's not a dick measuring contest about who's got it the worst, does it? Do you know what I mean? I think that would be my thing. It was something that was pointed to me, as I mentioned then, about the depression I felt when my daughter was first born. Someone made a comment to me, went, we'll just think there's plenty of people out there who are really trying for a baby that can't have a baby. And I was like, and then I felt guilty about feeling like shit that I've got this opportunity to be a dad and I don't know how to handle it. And I was like, fuck me. And I get what they was trying to do, but I was like, that just made me feel worse.
Yeah, it does.
So I suppose that's the difference, I guess, in terms of where you're going to get advice from. And is that what happens in these groups, to not necessarily in that negative way, but are the lads sort of like like giving each other advice, or is it just you just talk and then people listen?
Basically, it's fantastic, right? So you have a talking ball. So if you go to these groups, there's no pressure to talk. If you don't want to talk, which some guys for the first time have just passed the ball on, so you can get a feel of it all. But it's good, because when we break up into the groups, say one person will be talking about one thing, and then another guy will be like, oh, well, I've had that, and then another guy, I've had that. So we always say never interrupt and stuff. You put your hand up if you want to talk. But it's good how, like, different people can, and they form little friendships and stuff.
Yeah, because they've been through similar experiences and things like that. Yeah,
exactly.
That's great.
Like, for instance, on one of the questions on Monday was, what's a hobby that you don't do enough of that you would like to do? So one guy mentioned about going to the motorbike racing, and then another guy was like, oh, well, I like to do up cars and stuff. Another guy was like, oh, I'm into bike racing too. So it's literally like being like in an absolute bike and car fest.
It's like that scene in Step Brothers, though. It's like, did we just become best friends?
Best friends, 100%,
yeah. That's brilliant.
Do you know what? I met a guy, he just happened to come down to the Ripon Man Club 2 weeks ago because Harrogate was shut off because of all the snow. And he was in my group. And we've just instantly formed like a friendship. It feels like, and that is the exact moment
we just become
best friends.
Yeah, that's brilliant. What would you? I suppose if I asked you to sell it to someone now, in a very short way, someone who was maybe thinking about going, but kind of like you said, the type of person that might just drive straight past, sit in the car. What would be the one thing you'd say to them to encourage them to come to a meeting?
I said this at the beginning. I said, obviously we cannot hashtag this because it's profanity, but I've always said hashtag fucking brilliant. I've always said that. But I think, the main thing is, as a guy, whatever you're going through, depression, anxiety, just anything, I think once you get into them, you're not alone. You realise, you are not in this alone. There's loads of people together. Like you said, 29 people just from a small town in Thirsk. And then the numbers are adding up as well. I think there was just short of 6,000 who attended across the country. But I think, that's the main thing to realise is you're not alone. And that is, it's huge for them. And I say to people as well, I try and encourage, say, look, if you are coming to start new, go sober, it doesn't happen overnight. It took me months. It took me, months. And I'm still working now to get where I am. But I got one message. Oh God, I'm gonna fucking break down again here. I got a message leading up to the Man Club and I thought it was just a guy inquiring about it, and it was from Mark. So I opened it up, and it said, "Hi Ross, you won't remember me, but I was the paramedic who turned up first at the scene when you tried to take your own life. I've just seen your AndysManClub video," and he said, "I'm absolutely fucking buzzing." He said, "I've plucked up the courage to message you because I didn't want to bring back trauma. I didn't think if it was going to be unprofessional. But he said, every time I go on Facebook, all I see is your face, so I've had to message you." And I was like, oh my God, thank you so much for messaging me. So we arranged to meet up on the Thursday. And I was nervous as hell. I thought, this guy has saved my life, and I'm nervous going to meet him. And I pulled up, say, "Mate, it's me, Geordie lad." And I could see the tears in his eyes, in mine. I just gave him the biggest hug ever. And he told me his part of the story. So he was working the Saturday morning. His colleague was just took a bit of overtime, was hoping for a quiet day, and I was the first call. And he said, "I don't know what it was, Ross," he said, "because I attend these calls all the time. But he said, yours is just always stuck in my head." He said, "I turned up." He said, "Your mum was absolutely exhausted." So me and mum have never spoke about what happened that day. He said, "We had to take over from your mum." He said, "We literally had to flip all your furniture in your house." He said, "Your mum had been working on you for about 15, 20 minutes. And he said, "We had 10 paramedics who worked on you for over an hour." The air ambulance turned up. And they took me off to hospital. Not in the air ambulance. They turned up to just to carry on working on me. And Mark said in his debrief, after it all happened, he said, "We'll never see that lad again." And he said, "So obviously we can't chase up what has happened to people because we see it day in, day out." He said, "But honest to God, to see your face and to see what you are doing now is just absolutely amazing." So that triggered the chat to have with my mum about what she saw. Yeah, and it was a tough talk. She came into the house and she thought I was dead. She said, Ross, she said, you were just blue in the face. All your face is slumped. And she said, I'd grabbed hold of you. She said, I couldn't physically pull you down. And I forgot to mention this bit, but if you believe in fate or not, the week before I actually did it, my grandma asked my mum if I wanted anything for the house. Like I mentioned before, like cooking. So she bought me a sharp knife. Mum said when I came in, that was on the side. She said that was the first thing I saw. She said, without that sharp knife, I wouldn't have been able to cut you down. So she cut me down. And she said, Ross, she said, I was physically exhausted. I was resuscitating you. And she said, I was dripping with sweat. And she said, when the paramedics came in, they had to take me outside.
And treat her as well,
and just,
thing.
Yeah, look after her. And she said, they just kept coming in. She said, they just flipped all your stuff while they sat and worked on you. She said, it was horrendous. And then, so we'd not spoke about that for, 20 months? So that was hard. And I think it put into realisation, like, how lucky I am, you know? And to have this, I said to him, do you mind if I, like, take a picture and put a post up? He said, absolutely. And I remember putting in my post, to have this effect on someone's life, whose job it was to save mine, was massive. Because he said, you know, I always wondered what had happened to you. And so now I've kept in touch with Mark, and I think I must have hugged him about 20 times and just told him thank you to him and his colleagues. But yeah, to actually hear other people's sides of the stories.
Yeah, it's so important that, and you know, we'll probably kind of finish it on this as well, because I think that's so important, especially when we talk about drug addiction. Because the paramedics, one thing that, again, this is my interpretation. I think paramedics, when they get the call about an overdose, it's met with, oh, for fuck's sake, I should be out there saving someone from a heart attack. Yeah. Something that they haven't done to themselves.
Yeah.
And you sometimes see, like, or maybe it's just my interpretation of it, the attitude of paramedics when they're working on someone who's had a drug overdose, almost like it's an inconvenience to them.
Yeah.
But they do the job because it's their job. Now, there's something in that where I think, I just wish you could, those paramedics, of all the people that I've spoken to that have had overdoses, like you said, the paramedics, we'll never see that person again. And it's right, they often don't. They don't see what happens. And I'd love for them to see what happens when people finally do get recovery and understand that what they're doing, whilst at the time it may feel like an inconvenience, or yes, I should be doing this, yes, it feels like, oh, this person's done this to themselves. I wish they could see what they had done in that moment and how those people are getting on now in life once they achieve recovery, because if they didn't do what they did, that person wouldn't be where they are today. Yeah. And I just wish they could see the end of it, because I think it's something that it almost saddens me a little bit that the paramedics don't see the end result of what they contribute to. So hearing that story from yourself about someone that has worked on yourself, and seeing how many people go on and start sharing their story, start working in such a public facing role in the way that you are, I just wish they could see the recovery, see the end journey of that person and what they have contributed to.
What Mark had said to me, he says, I almost feel guilty when I turn up to signs of suicide, people trying to take their own life. He said, when I save their life, he said, I feel guilty because that person doesn't want to be here. He said, so I almost feel a bit of guilt about myself. And he said, he took some posters off me for AndysManClub. He said, I'm going to promote your story, to everyone. Yeah. And yeah, not very often. I don't think it's often at all.
At all, no.
So hearing that, do you know what? It just gives the rocket up your ass just to keep doing what you're doing, do you know?
Absolutely, yeah. No, thank you, Ross. So you talked about AndysManClub, how they like to end the sessions with some light-hearted questions, and we do the same thing here. So my first question for you is, what is your favourite word?
Can it be?
Absolutely, yeah.
Excuse me. Probably fucking hell, because I say it quite a lot in my business, yeah.
Least favourite word?
Least favourite word? Probably moist.
Moist. Tell me something that excites you.
Can it be clean? Excites me. I think just seeing other people's recovery stories, that really does give a massive, massive excitement, yeah.
Tell me something that doesn't excite you.
Negative people.
What sound or noise do you love?
Oasis.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Probably all this pop shit that's out at the moment.
If you could do any job in the world other than what you're currently doing now, what would you like it to be?
Oh, God, it's a tough one. That is a tough one. I've always said I'd like to do what my dad did to begin with and come back as a jockey, I think.
Nice.
Yeah.
What's the worst job you could ever imagine doing?
Worst job? Probably cleaning toilets or sewerage and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to do cleaning toilets. It was no, you're right. It was absolutely awful. I don't know how people miss the toilet, but there you are.
Yeah.
It's like, how the fuck does it end up there? That's another story. And then lastly, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Your dad's been fine. Here he is. Here's a hug.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah.
Ross, thank you so much for being on Believing People. It's
been a pleasure. Thank you, matey.
Thank you. And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believing People podcast, we'd love for you to share it with others who might find it meaningful. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode, and leaving a review will help us reach more people and continue challenging stigma around addiction and recovery. For additional resources, insights and updates, explore the links in this episode description. And to learn more about our mission and hear more incredible stories, you can visit us directly at believingpeoplepodcast.com. Podcast.com. 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 Podcast.com.